Ketosis is a physiological state that occurs when we have low carbohydrate availability. It helps us to utilize fat as fuel source, so we're burning fat as opposed to carbohydrates for energy. The ketogenic diet seems to be very beneficial in patients with obesity, type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, Alzheimer's, epilepsy, and Parkinson's. There's less decline in those conditions when on the ketogenic diet or maybe using these ketone ester supplements. The ketogenic diet can maybe also be something beneficial for ultra endurance athletes. You don't have that fluctuation in glucose, your glucose control is more stable. It can have various health benefits.
Welcome to smulcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shaundré Jacobs, and today we're joined by Louise Engelbrecht, a sports nutritionist. Louise is currently doing a joint PhD with Stellenbosch University as well as KU Leuven University in Belgium. Louise works with a wide variety of clients. That includes your top athletes as well as your recreational athletes, and she provides scientific nutritional advice to help them improve their performance. Furthermore, Louise also has a postgraduate diploma in sports nutrition. Louise has a wide variety of clients whom she works with to help them enhance performance through strategic strategies to help them in terms of their nutrition. There's been various discussions around ketosis and how it actually affects your body. In this episode, we will be looking at what ketosis is, how it works, and actually is it worth it? We'll also be looking at ketone esters and how that enhances your performance from a physical as well as cognitive side and also your recovery. Let's get started. Welcome, Louise. So there's been various discussions relating to ketosis and especially on low-carb diets as well as fasting. Maybe can we start off just by saying what is ketosis and can you maybe inform us?
So ketosis is a physiological state that occurs when ketone bodies are formed. So ketone bodies are formed naturally in the body when we have low carbohydrate availability. Mm-hmm. It has a lot of functions in the body, but one of them that are most promoted for the ketogenic diet is the fact that it helps us to utilize fat as fuel source. So we're burning fat as opposed to carbohydrates for energy. And we have a lot of fat stored in the body. So that's an effective weight loss method. So it also has an impact on certain hormones that control appetite. So it suppresses your hunger hormone, ghrelin. So in the end, it also helps you to reduce your overall calorie intake. The diet is also very effective for certain metabolic conditions such as type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. Because if you follow this diet, you don't have that fluctuation in glucose, your glucose control is more stable, and it can have various health benefits, outcomes. So if we look at normal circulating ketone bodies, it's typically less than 0.5 millimole per liters. So as soon as this goes over 0.8, we term it as physiological ketosis, or some will call it hyperketonemia. This is a condition that happens when we are in energetic stress. So for example, fasting, starvation, or if we do go onto a ketogenic diet. Sometimes prolonged intense exercise can also elevate your ketone levels, maybe between 0.3 to up to 2 millimolars. The prescription is typically less than 20 grams of carbs per day. Some are a bit less restrictive, maybe between 50 and the least restrictive is up to 100 grams of carbs per day. So what this diet looks like typically is about 70% of your energy intake should come from fat sources. So that's like avocado, seeds, nuts, some animal products, especially fatty fish is a great option. Then up to 20% should be protein. So you don't want your protein to be too high, as that can also lower the level of ketosis. And then only 20 grams, maybe up to 100 grams of carbohydrates. So if you look at your different food groups, your vegetables, your non-starchy vegetables, typically you can eat as much as you want from them. Okay, but like your potatoes, sweet potato, butternut, rice, and pastas, you should definitely lower that and try to cut that out. But after, maybe a couple of months, once you're habituated to the diet, you can start to reintroduce some of these sources like the sweet potato, but again in small amounts, maybe about 100 gram at a time. Whole grains are also not typically allowed on this diet, so you'll need to get your fiber more from your vegetables and stuff like psyllium husk you can add, and seeds are great, like flax seeds and chia seeds. And those are important for your gut health, but generally going onto this ketogenic diet seems to improve gut health because you are not consuming all this amount of sugar.
Mm-hmm. So is ketosis a natural state for the body?
Yes, it is a natural physiological process that occurs during these situations of metabolic stress, as I just mentioned, the starvation or fasting. If we think of overnight fast, okay, so you fasted for a little bit, your ketone levels might be up to 0.3. So you're not in ketosis yet then, so this can take a few days to actually reach ketosis. How we store glucose in the form of glycogen in the body is either in the liver or the muscle. So 80 to 100 grams in the liver and up to 400 grams in the muscle. As an athlete, you have the capacity maybe to up that a little bit more. Now, the liver glycogen we can deplete within a day, but the muscle glycogen can take maybe up to 4 days. So at minimum, you will take at least 2 days of following the diet or fasting to get into a state of physiological ketosis. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot for us to find out about ketones, but definitely there's a beneficial effect for weight loss. And I think that was the initial interest. And now we're moving more towards how it can actually benefit people in sports, and it has a great recovery benefit.
Okay, Louise, so you spoke about, ketosis, and you mentioned briefly about what ketone bodies are, but what are they and how does the body use them as an energy source?
We have 3 ketone bodies, beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate. So those two interchange within our bodies. And then we have the spontaneous breakdown form as acetone. Now, acetone has potential benefits for epilepsy, anticonvulsive properties, but it's not used for fuel and mostly gets secreted in our urine or in our breath, while beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate goes to various cells or tissue within the body, specifically the brain, the heart, skeletal muscle, and the kidneys, to be used as energy. So it's quite interesting. We all know that our brain functions on glucose, but we've found, not recently, but that the brain also prefers ketones. And for example, during a normal day, your brain will maybe use up to 130 grams of glucose. So in the early 1960s, they found that the brain also prefers ketones as a much efficient energy source. So in 1973, Owen did a study on obese individuals, and they saw that during a 5-week of starvation, the brain that typically uses 130 grams of carbs a day went down to only about 25 grams a day. And they were using ketones to fuel their brain with no negative impact on the cognitive function. So the cognitive function was maintained, which is quite good. So that study inspired more research in ketogenic diet and now the ketone esters on cognitive function.
So Louise, tell me, how does one know when you are entering a state of ketosis?
Yeah, so one of the most obvious signs would be the bad smell in the breath. So it's a bit of an unusual fruity smell, and that's due to the acetone that we're breathing out. So that's one of the main signs. Then typically when you enter the diet, you can experience what we call keto flu. So that's a bit of brain fog, and you can actually feel like you're having a flu. But that's not necessarily the ketones, but this can be due to the change in the diet. And if you think of I mentioned how we store the glucose in the liver and the muscle, but with each gram, there's also 3 grams of water stored. So if we're depleting these glycogen stores, you're also dehydrating, and with that, you're losing some salt. So that can influence or bring up these symptoms. You also see that your appetite is a bit suppressed. So that's for people in weight loss benefit. And some other symptoms that can occur also due to the diet, such as maybe stomach cramps and diarrhea and nausea. But typically those last about 2 weeks and then you should be fine.
So can you clarify the difference between ketosis and ketoacidosis? Because we've always heard these words being used interchangeably. Is there a difference or is it the same?
Yes, so ketosis is a physiological process that is typically planned. So especially if you do intermittent fasting or the diet. And with that, I've already mentioned some benefits, but your glucose is normal, your blood pH is normal, while the ketoacidosis occurs due to an insulin insufficiency. If the insulin is low, we can't get the glucose into the muscle to oxidize. So now we have accumulation of ketone bodies, and that can go as high to above 13.8 millimolar, which is not ideal. And your pH in your blood is also lowering, which can negatively affect your tissue function. And you also have accumulation of glucose in the blood.
So Louise, there's a lot of products out there actually, marketing ketosis. Can you maybe give us some insight into what is good, what is maybe, not something we should be looking out for, but what is your recommendation?
Yes, so the market is full with different type of supplements promoting ketones, but some of them we can almost group this into supplements that will enhance ketosis when you follow the ketogenic diet, and then supplements that will induce ketosis without having to follow the diet. Okay, so one of the supplements that are typically used when you're on a ketogenic diet is MCT oil. So that's a medium chain triglyceride. And why that is typically used is because with a ketogenic diet, yes, we have low carbohydrate intake, but also high fat. So up to about 70% of your diet should be fat. Now, this type of fatty acid can diffuse into the circulation when we absorb it and diffuse into the muscle cell. So there's no active transporters, so you can get it into your cell quicker to be able to use it as energy. And that will help trigger ketosis. The thing about MCT oil is that it's often also linked to some side effects, such as nausea, stomach cramps, and diarrhea. Okay, so that's not what you necessarily want. Then there's some ketone supplements that are branded as fat burners. Okay, so you have stuff like ketone jellies and ketone cuts and ketone burns. Now, I would encourage the people that want to use these to go and look at the ingredients list. Okay, some of it might be like they won't understand necessarily what they read, but a lot of these supplements, they don't contain any form of ketone. Some of them are only stimulants. And yes, a stimulant will help you to burn fat, but it's not going to help you long term. It's going to cause some havoc on your metabolism. And as soon as you stop it, the weight is just going to come back. Then there are some that actually contain, most of them contain MCT oil or a ketone salt. And they promote like sustained energy, like maybe more focus, and also improve fat metabolism. The ketone salts do this, and the MCT oil can also help with it. But again, same as the MCT, the ketone salts aren't that effective, and they can also cause some stomach issues. And then the final category would be to induce ketosis exogenously. So you go into a state of ketosis without having to follow the diet. And those are typically your ketone esters. So it's a ketone body bound to a fat. You have monoesters and diesters. You also have ketone salts and ketone precursors. And these supplements, some are quite effective, while others maybe not so great. But I think we'll delve into that a little bit more later.
So Louise, you spoke a lot about supplements. So is there a difference between natural ketones and supplements, or is it the same?
The natural physiological ketoses are from the diet. And typically, if you follow this diet, you're constantly in a state of ketosis. While if we use the supplements, like the esters and stuff that I just mentioned, you are more intermittently in ketosis. So as soon as you take it, you go into a ketosis for a couple of hours maybe, and then you're back to a normal state. The 4 categories, the precursors, okay, so you have R13-butanediol. That one seems to be quite effective. Within 1.5 to 2.5 hours, you'll get to peak ketosis and stay in ketosis for up to 5 hours. And there's very low side effects related to this one. You do get it in South Africa. The Ketone IQ, for example, uses this ketone precursor. Ketone monoesters seems to be, at the moment, your most effective ketone supplement. Very little side effects related to it, and it also is able to elevate your ketones up to 3 to 5 millimolar within about half an hour. So it's quite fast acting. The ketone salts, they only elevate your blood ketone concentration up to 1 millimolar per liter. So it doesn't go that high, and they typically also more linked to gastrointestinal issues. With the diesters, we have 2 groups. You have bisexonal, which seems promising to be able to also in the line of the monoester, but the acetoacetone one seems to have also more side effects linked to using that one. Yeah, so I won't recommend him.
So Louise, if we look at discoveries in ketone research, what has been the major discoveries that you can maybe allude to and share with our listeners?
Yes, so ketones were discovered by doctors in 1865 in diabetic comatized patients. So they discovered it is acetone in their urine. In the 1920s, they started using a ketogenic diet to treat patients with epilepsy. So they found that it's quite effective to reduce convulsions. Then in 1945, they saw that ketone bodies are a very energy efficient fuel source when you compare it to a carbohydrate or fat. So we use less energy to make energy from ketones, and also it uses less oxygen. In 1967, more research was done on the brain, and we saw that the brain prefers ketones. In the 1970s, they started to develop a ketone salt, and it was purely developed to study ketone metabolism. But later on in the 70s, they developed the first ketone ester. And then only in 2005, they developed a ketone ester that went into the first human safety trials. In 2016, Cox et al. Did a study where they looked at the energy contribution from ketone esters and its effect on performance. Now, that is the study that triggered a lot of research with ketone esters in sport. And they initially saw that it was quite a high, up to 18% contribution from ketones to energy. But later on, that same study group saw that it's only up to about 5%. So in certain sports like ultra endurance, for example, that might still be a beneficial adaptation. And they also saw that it improved time trial performance, but most of the studies that followed this did not find any performance improvements. So in 2017, the first study by Van Loon, the exercise physiology research group at Coalition, found that using these ketone esters have some beneficial properties for recovery after resistance training. And the next year, Potho et al. From that same research group found that using the ketone ester blunt most of the symptoms associated with overtraining and endurance cycles. So, yeah, those are kind of the big studies that encourage more and more research with ketone esters in the field of sports science.
Sure. Wow, Louise, thank you so much. That was very interesting. So tell me, how do ketone esters enhance performance under extreme conditions?
So if we think of natural ketosis, it typically occurs in extreme conditions such as fasting, starvation. So that's no surprise that even using the supplement, the ketone ester supplement, we also see that it's beneficial under extreme conditions. So for example, at hypoxia. So this would be applicable for your mountaineers or ultra endurance athletes, doing something like the sky run. We saw that ketone bodies contribute more towards energy production in cases where oxygen delivery is a bit lower. So it's contributing more energy and helping you to cope more with these hypoxic conditions. Also, we see that there's more blood flow towards the brain and the muscle, reducing your chances of developing something like acute mountain sickness. A possible drawback can be a bit of metabolic acidosis due to the increase in ketone levels, and that can influence the function of the muscle. Another extreme condition is exercising in the heat. And I think that's something that none of us in South Africa are not accustomed to. Typically, when we exercise in the heat, we have an increased chance of dehydration. And with dehydration, there's a lot of symptoms associated with that. But one of them includes, having an increased perceived exertion. So it can feel harder than it should be. You have mental fatigue is elevated and stuff like that when you're dehydrated. Now, what we've seen with a couple of studies so far is that there's a reduced urine production during exercise when using these ketones. So there's a potential diuretic effect, and using the ketone esters during exercise in the heat may reduce your chances of developing hydration or the severity of your dehydration.
So Louise, there's recently been discussions around the impact of ketone esters and sleep. Can you maybe unpack that in terms of what the benefits are, if there are any?
Yes, so there's emerging evidence that ketosis help with sleep. If we take it back a step, we have different phases of sleep. So REM is your rapid eye movement sleep, and that's important for mood, learning, and memory. Then slow wave sleep is important for restoration. So in the research, there's often only defined as REM and non-REM sometimes. But in 2014 was the first time that ketones were linked to sleep. And what they found was that the ketone esters were able to improve the slow wave sleep, so more restorative sleep. The ketogenic diet has also been investigated, and again with epilepsy children, they saw that ketosis improved REM sleep, while with a normal population without any disease and without sleep deficiencies, they saw that the sleep was improved for slow wave sleep. The ketones improved slow wave sleep. Also, with exercise close to bedtime, that sometimes disturbs sleep quality. And we've seen that taking a ketone ester immediately after exercise and before bed improve your sleep efficiency. So possible mechanisms on how ketosis actually helps sleep is that ketone bodies seem to upregulate GABA, and that helps with the slow wave sleep. It reduces glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. So if that's reduced, there's less wake after sleep onset. And then it also increases nocturnal dopamine, which will increase REM sleep.
So Louise, there's been a lot of attention given to ketone esters in the athlete realm, especially in elite sports, etc., where athletes are trying to enhance their performance as well as their adaptations and recovery. So can you maybe give us some insight into how that does enhance their performance in terms of ketone esters?
Yes, so ketone esters, we already mentioned that it is a potential alternative fuel source. But if we think of VO2 max, okay, so that's always something important for your endurance athletes. So first you'll look at oxygen delivery. And what we've seen now is that the ketone esters actually upregulate EPO production. And the EPO stimulates the hemoglobin, which is the oxygen carrying proteins on your red blood cells. So we have an improved oxygen delivery to the active muscles. So then the next part would be to extract the oxygen into the muscle and the muscle to utilize the oxygen. So we've also seen that the ketone esters actually produce more capillaries. So there's more blood flow close to the muscles for this oxygen extraction, but also delivery of the nutrients and then removal of waste products. There's also some evidence that ketosis will improve mitochondrial function. So that's our energy rooms in the muscle and improve your ability to oxidize fat. Unfortunately, these adaptations so far have not really translated into improved performance. So with the ketogenic diet, that has seemed to really upregulate fat oxidation, but even the ketone ester, like I've recently seen after 8 days of using a ketone ester, the day after stopping, the fat oxidation was like significantly higher. And fat max, so that's the intensity at which this maximal fat oxidation occurs. But initially, this would maybe lead to a decrease in performance if you're following a ketogenic diet because the exercise efficiency is a bit lower and it really takes a long time to fully adapt to a ketogenic diet. And it depends on the intensity. So the exercise economy is reduced when you go over 70% of VO2 max. The ester, on the other hand, seems to potentially improve exercise economy. So I think maybe at this point it's important just to mention that the ketogenic diet and the ketone ester supplements both induce ketosis, but the physiological mechanism is not the same because the condition is not the same. The one is with carbohydrates and the other one is without. So their benefits can't be, if I found this in the diet, it's going to be the same with the supplement. However, the research so far doesn't show much improvements in performance, but it does show quite beneficial in terms of recovery. So in recovery, we see stuff like it has anabolic effects, so it helps the muscle rebuild, and anti-catabolic effects, so meaning that less muscle breakdown. So that is maybe something that can be quite beneficial for your sports individual. We've also seen that it might have some impact on inflammation, so less inflammation, and a lot of, physiological markers of overtraining seems to be blunted. For example, as well, like with overtraining, your appetite seems to decrease, and even though ketosis typically decrease appetite, in the stressful situation, it does elevate your appetite and help you to match your energy expenditure. And then I think I've already mentioned with the heat training that there might be a potential benefit with helping you to stay hydrated.
Okay, Louise, so can you maybe explain how ketone esters affects your cognitive performance?
Yes, the ketogenic diet has been shown to be effective to improve cognitive performance in neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, epilepsy, and Parkinson's. So improve performance in terms of more attention, alertness, decision-making, and memory, stuff like that. However, the benefits only seem to be there when there is some cognitive impairment. But with healthy individuals, it does seem to improve mental clarity. Then with the supplements, there's also now more research to show that it can help maintain cognitive performance in situations where it's cognitive fatiguing. So maybe in certain sports, team sports, and even during ultra endurance, like a 100K ultra endurance event, it seems to be able to help you maintain your cognitive performance while, in these studies, we always have a control group. So in the control group, we would see decrements in performance, while the ketone group were able to maintain their reaction time and also have more accurate responses during these cognitive function tests.
Okay, so Louise, we spoke a lot about ketones, and I just want to know, why is it so exciting to do research on it?
Yes, so it is a hot topic at the moment, but there's still a lot we don't know. So a lot of the time in research, the practice kind of informs the research, and the research is a bit behind. We still need to know stuff like, what is long-term adaptation on the ketogenic diet? What implications does it have on our health? And does it, once we're habituated to the diet, do we actually see improvements in performance? Also, maybe long-term exposure to the supplements can also have, different effects. So acute versus chronic. The finding that I mentioned about the capillarization, that is a positive finding that we see now in sport, but it can also be beneficial in health. The ketogenic diet seems to be very beneficial in patients with obesity, type 2 diabetes, or insulin resistance. Maybe I can share some experience that I had with a lady. I ran a low-carb kickstart program last year, and she attended the program. She was able to lose quite a bit of weight. And before we started, she was kind of living a very sedentary life due to pain and complications due to the type 2 diabetes. And towards the end of the program, she was asking me for more exercises, and she was being able to play with her grandkids and do more stuff and being able to live a more active lifestyle. So that's a very positive finding and something that we need to potentially explore more. The ketogenic diet can maybe also be something beneficial for ultra endurance athletes, because you are competing for such an extended period. It's often associated with gut issues because we're not used to consuming so much carbohydrates. So there's a field that we need to investigate, and even with the supplements. So that's where my interest is. I love ultra endurance, but more the mountain biking and the repeated multi-day events. So if we're using these supplements, will it improve our sleep? Will we have less muscle damage, less mental fatigue, and be able to perform better, and maybe extend our careers because we're not being so injured during our activities? There's a lot of exciting findings up to date that still needs to be explored.
How can someone safely experiment with ketones and ketone esters?
So the thing about ketone esters or ketone supplements, they're very expensive. And maybe something also that people should be aware of is that they taste horrible. But there are now more brands that are bringing out supplements that are not the raw ketones, but they try to reduce the bad taste. If you want to use ketone esters or ketone precursors or the bishexyl diester, those are the three that I would recommend for people that want to experiment with the supplement without going on the diet. It depends on how you want to use it. Okay, if you want to use it to improve sleep, use it within the 30 minutes before you go to bed. If you want to use it because you're going to compete at high altitudes, always start experimenting or using it during your training sessions. So don't use it on race day for the first time, for example. But in those cases, use it the first dose maybe half an hour before you start exercising, just to see how you feel, and then a second dose 20 to 30 minutes within exercise. These ketone esters and the precursors, they are safe. So there's a lot of research done on the safety. So there should not be any issues, but just be aware of stuff like the salts and some of the diesters that are linked to gastrointestinal issues. If we look at the supplements that are promoted for weight loss, I would not recommend that you use them.
What's one surprising or little known fact about ketones and ketone esters?
I think the neuroprotective properties of the ketone bodies are really surprising and a great find. So I've mentioned how it's been used in Parkinson's, epilepsy, and Alzheimer's, and it seems that the ketone esters are really protective. So there's less decline in those conditions when on the ketogenic diet or maybe using these ketone ester supplements. Stuff like less oxidative stress in the brain, less inflammatory responses, and we have the additional fuel source from the ketone bodies. Potentially also due to these actions that it has on the tissue of the brain, it can also potentially prevent any neurodegenerative diseases. But still more research are needed to confirm that, but it does show potential.
So if we look at an approach on health and fitness, how can our knowledge on ketones actually enhance the health and fitness industry, essentially?
Ketosis has a lot of benefits on metabolic stress. So from a health perspective, that can be very beneficial, as I mentioned, with the diabetic or obese population. Also, the fact that it is showing a lot of potential to improve recovery, maybe that can help our athletes to train harder without having the negative benefits, and maybe shorter recovery times in periods of repetitive competition or short period of competition. It might be beneficial then. Also, potentially in cases of injury. So I mentioned that it has anticatabolic effects and anabolic effects. So during injury, especially with a lower limb, your athlete's a lot of time immobile, and we see a lot of muscle wasting. So I think there's potential benefit of using the ketone esters during those periods to prevent the muscle wasting.
How can our listeners start this ketosis diet?
The first thing is you have to have the correct mindset, because often people are like, oh no, I need to give up my piece of cake, and they're more focused on what can't I do. But actually, if you want to follow a ketogenic diet, you can still have delicious meals. My advice would typically be to go cold turkey and go through your cupboards and start reading the ingredients list. Look at what is actually in this product. So there's a lot of items in our food cupboards that are quite high in sugar that we don't even know. So if you look at the nutritional label, so you'll often have carbohydrates, and it will give you the amount per 100 gram, and often it will also give total sugar. So then you can get an idea of how much sugar is actually in this food item. So ideally, you want to consume less than 6 grams of sugar per day. Also, if you read the ingredients list, it's typically listed from the item that's the highest concentration in that food to the lowest. So then if you see sugar at the top, it's a no-go. Now, with the ketogenic diet, 70% of your food intake or the energy intake should be from fat, and then up to about 20% should be from protein. And the carbohydrates, if you can get it down to 20 grams per day, great. But if you want to be sort of more lenient, at least 50 or maybe 100 grams. So foods that you should exclude are like your beige foods, like potato and rice and all those starches. Ultra-processed foods, because they often are high in sugar. And all your sugary foods and sweets and pastries. Cold drinks, even the lower sugary drinks are not that great. So rather avoid these. And if you don't have it in your house, you won't fall into the trap. You need to plan your meals to make sure that you can stick to the diet. Rather pack in your own lunches to work, because often the shops and the cafeterias around your work tend to have higher carbohydrate meals. Then fats that you can focus on are stuff like avocado is great. Fatty fish is always great. Tuna wraps and tuna salads and stuff. Milk and cheese are something that people should be careful of, not eat too much of, even if it is it's a fat in a sense. But if you already have a bit of insulin resistance, we tend to see that because of the lactose, there's still a spike in glucose. And the idea of this diet is also to have your glucose levels stable and not go up and down all the time.
So how long can our listeners expect to stay on this diet?
It is something that is promoted to be a complete lifestyle change, that you can sustain this for the rest of your life. And some people are able to do this. But as I mentioned earlier, going onto this diet requires a little bit more planning. And if you go to friends and functions, you're not always going to be able to stick to this diet. And I've worked with some clients that have successfully gone onto a ketogenic diet and they're able to maintain this, while others struggle a bit. For example, I worked with a rider that has epilepsy, and it wasn't necessarily that bad for him to be on the diet, but he was someone that took very long to fully adapt. So the epilepsy was more or less under control, but he didn't have energy on his bike. So as soon as he had to go up the mountain, he felt weak. So for him, we had to make changes and introduce a little bit more carbs. So it depends on the situation. And I've worked with other athletes as well in the past that tried the diet and it was effective at the time when we wanted to lose weight. But after a while, they started to crave or need a little bit more carbohydrates during intense exercise sessions.
So in ending off, are there any closing remarks or advice that you can give to our listeners in terms of following this type of diet?
It's important to remember that the ketogenic diet and exogenous ketosis from using a ketone ester or diester is not the same thing. So with the diet, it's a lifestyle change. It's a bit more commitment. And as soon as you reach ketosis, you're basically in ketosis the entire time. But with the esters, you're still using carbs at a high intensity or high-ish intensity. So your physiological state is different and you're only intermittently in ketosis. So if you want to use it, you need to decide in what aspect do I need to use it, because that will determine if you take the supplement before exercise, after exercise, or during. And just because they both lead to you being in ketosis doesn't mean that the findings of one is applicable to the findings of the other. So really look at the sources where you get your information from to decide, will this be something that's beneficial for me or not?
Thank you, Louise, for an insightful discussion on what ketosis is. We learned about what it is in terms of definition. We know how it works and also how it affects the human body under training conditions as well as even under extreme conditions as well. It was really insightful to learn everything, and I found it personally interesting, and I know that the listeners would have found it as well. So thank you so much for your insight and your time and your effort. And to our listeners, until next time, keep living a healthier and fuller life.